Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Vembo, and if you're new here, this is where we dive deep into the wildest, most unbelievable stories that the internet has to offer. Now before we jump in, just like in every video, I can't thank you guys enough for the love you guys show. In the last video, I mentioned wanting to hit 100 subscribers before July ends, and you guys absolutely smashed my expectation. Thank you so much. Anyways, enough with my yapping. Go grab your favourite drink, get comfortable, and let's dive into some stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family, relationships, and just how far people will go when they're pushed to their breaking point. Also, comment where you're watching from. Our first story comes from someone who thought they knew their family better than anyone else. They were wrong. I never thought I'd be writing this, but I need to get it off my chest because I'm still processing what happened. My name is Alex, and I'm 24 years old. For the past 3 years, I've been living with my girlfriend Sarah in what I thought was a pretty normal relationship. We split bills, we had our routines, and everything seemed fine on the surface. But about 6 months ago, things started getting weird. Sarah began working late more often, sometimes not coming home until after midnight. She'd say she was at the office, but when I'd call her work line, it would go straight to voicemail. Her phone was always face down, and she'd get jumpy whenever it buzzed during dinner. I'm not usually the paranoid type, but something felt off. The way she'd change the subject whenever I asked about her day, or how she'd suddenly need to take calls in the other room. Little things that individually meant nothing, but together painted a picture I didn't want to see. Last Tuesday, I decided to surprise her at work with lunch. I figured if she was really pulling those long hours, she'd appreciate the gesture. I walked into her office building, took the elevator to the 7th floor, where she worked, and asked the receptionist for Sarah Mitchell. The woman looked confused. She checked her computer, made a phone call, then looked back at me with this apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name working here. Are you sure you have the right company?" My stomach dropped. I showed her a picture of Sarah on my phone, described her job title, everything. Nothing. The receptionist was patient with me, but it was clear. Sarah had never worked there. Not now, not ever. I sat in my car in that parking lot for 2 hours, just staring at the building, trying to make sense of what I'd just learned. Where had she been going every day for 3 years? Who was paying her? How had she been contributing to our rent? That night, I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Instead, I waited until she left the next morning. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. I kept my distance, 3 cars back, as she drove across town to a neighbourhood I'd never seen before. She pulled into the driveway of a modest 2-story house with a white picket fence and flower boxes in the windows. I parked down the street and watched as she used her own key to open the front door, like she lived there, like it was home. I waited until she went inside, then I called in sick to work and spent the entire day parked on that street. Around 3:30, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A school bus stopped in front of the house, and 2 kids got off. A boy who looked maybe 8, and a girl who couldn't have been older than 6. They ran up to the front door, and Sarah opened it before they could even knock. She hugged them. She ruffled the boys' hair. She took their backpacks and ushered them inside like she'd done it 1,000 times before. I sat there until almost midnight, watching through the windows as they had dinner together, as she helped them with homework, as she tucked them into bed. At one point, a man came home, tall brown hair, wearing a business suit. He kissed Sarah on the cheek, and they stood in the kitchen talking, while she made him a plate of food. She had another family, a whole other life that I knew nothing about. When she finally came home to our apartment that night, she acted completely normal. Asked about my day, complained about her difficult boss, kissed me goodnight like nothing had happened. I played along because I didn't know what else to do. The next few days were torture. I kept waiting for her to slip up, to give me some sign that she was ready to tell me the truth, but she didn't. She just kept living this double life, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Finally, last Sunday, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until she was in the shower, then I went through her purse. I found a second wallet hidden in a zippered compartment, one with a different driver's license. Same picture, same Sarah, but the name read Sarah Chen, and the address was the house I'd watched her enter. There were credit cards in that name, membership cards, even photos of her with those kids at what looked like a school carnival. In one picture, she was wearing what looked like a wedding ring. When she came out of the bathroom, I was sitting on the bed with both wallets in my hands. Her face went completely white. "Alex, I can explain," she said, but I held up my hand. 3 years, I said. 3 years I've been living with someone who doesn't even exist. She sat down across from me, and for the first time since I'd known her, Sarah looked small, vulnerable. "My real name is Sarah Chen," she said quietly. "I'm married to David. Those are our kids, Emma and Jake. We've been married for 10 years. I felt like I was going to be sick. "So, what am I? What is this?" She started crying then, these quiet tears that somehow made everything worse. "I love David. I love my kids. But I felt so trapped, so invisible. Being a wife and mother is all I was, and I started to disappear. I created Sarah Mitchell as an escape, a way to be someone else, even if it was just for a few hours." "A few hours," I laughed, but there was no humour in it. "You've been living here for 3 years. You share my bed every night. It started as just an apartment I'd rent to get away sometimes. But then I met you at that coffee shop, and you were so different from David. You saw me as this independent woman with her own career and her own life. I liked who I was when I was with you. I stood up then because I couldn't sit still anymore. So you just decided to have 2 lives, 2 relationships? Did it ever occur to you that maybe David deserves to know his wife is living with another man? David thinks I've been working late shifts at a consulting firm downtown. He thinks I'm travelling for work when I'm here with you." The scope of her deception was staggering. She'd been lying to everyone, to me, to her husband, to her children. She'd built this elaborate double life and maintained it for years without either family knowing about the other. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. "At first I thought I'd just keep the apartment for a few months. But then we got serious and I couldn't figure out how to tell you the truth without losing you. You were never going to tell me, were you?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. I told her she had, until the end of the week, to figure out what she wanted to do. But she couldn't keep living both lives. She had to choose. Either she was going to tell David everything and leave him, or she was going to end things with me and go back to being a full-time wife and mother. She chose David. She chose her real family. She moved out 3 days ago. She left a letter explaining that she was going to therapy, that she was going to tell David everything, and that she hoped someday I could forgive her. She said she never meant to hurt anyone, but she knew that didn't make it okay. I'm still trying to process it all. For 3 years, I was in love with someone who didn't really exist. The woman I thought I knew was just a character she created to escape her real life. Every memory we made, every moment we shared, it all feels tainted now because it was built on lies. The worst part is, I can't even be angry at her husband and kids. They're victims in this too. They have no idea that their wife and mother has been living a secret life for years. Maybe they'll work it out, maybe they won't. But at least now everyone knows the truth. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. How do you move on from something like this? How do you trust anyone again when someone can lie so completely, so convincingly, for so long? That story is absolutely devastating. 3 years of someone's life built on a complete fabrication, and somehow the person living the lie managed to compartmentalize it so thoroughly that she could maintain 2 entirely separate families. The psychological complexity of that level of deception is honestly terrifying. But if you think that story was intense, wait until you hear what happened when someone discovered their roommate's disturbing hobby. This next one comes with a warning. It gets dark fast. I'm a 22-year-old college student, and I've been sharing an apartment with my roommate Marcus for about 8 months now. We found each other through a roommate matching service, and at first everything seemed normal. He was quiet, kept to himself, always paid his share of the bills on time. The perfect roommate, really. Marcus works night shifts at some warehouse job, so our schedules barely overlap. I'm usually asleep by the time he gets home, and he's sleeping when I leave for classes in the morning. We'd see each other maybe once or twice a week, just long enough to exchange pleasantries about bills or whose turn it was to buy toilet paper. About 3 months ago, I started noticing weird smells coming from his room. Not like garbage or dirty laundry, something chemical, sharp, like bleach mixed with something else I couldn't identify. When I asked him about it, he said he'd been doing some kind of art project that involved cleaning supplies. It seemed reasonable enough, so I didn't push it. Then I started finding things, little things that individually didn't mean much, but together started to paint a disturbing picture. Hair ties that weren't mine in the bathroom drain. A single earring on the kitchen counter that I'd never seen before. Women's clothing in the washing machine that definitely didn't belong to anyone I knew. When I asked Marcus about these things, he always had explanations. The hair ties were from his sister, who'd visited. The earring belonged to a girl he was seeing. The clothes were from the same girl. She'd left them after spending the night. But here's the thing. I'd never seen this mysterious girlfriend. Never heard her voice. Never saw her come or go. For someone who was apparently spending nights at our place, she was remarkably invisible. Last month I started having trouble sleeping. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to weird sounds. Shuffling footsteps, muffled voices, the sound of plastic bags rustling. Always around 2 or 3 a.m, always coming from Marcus's room or the hallway outside my door. One night I decided to investigate. I crept out of my room and saw a light under Marcus's door, which was weird because he was supposed to be at work. I pressed my ear to the door and heard what sounded like a one-sided conversation. Marcus's voice, talking to someone, but I couldn't hear anyone responding. "You look so peaceful like this," he was saying. "So much better than when you were fighting." My blood ran cold. I backed away from the door as quietly as I could and spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring at my ceiling. The next morning, I checked the parking lot. Marcus's car was there, even though he should have been at work. When I texted him asking if everything was okay, he said he'd called in sick with food poisoning. That's when I started paying closer attention to his schedule. I kept a log for 2 weeks, noting when his car was there, when I heard him moving around, when those weird late-night sounds happened. The pattern that emerged made my stomach turn. Marcus wasn't working night shifts. He was leaving the apartment around 10 p.m. and coming back between 1 and 3 a.m., always carrying large bags or containers. Then he'd spend hours in his room, doing God knows what, before finally going to sleep around dawn. Last Wednesday, I made a decision that probably saved my life. I hid a small camera in the hallway, one of those nanny cams that looks like a regular wall outlet. I needed to know what was happening in my own home. The footage from that first night was worse than anything I could have imagined. At 2:17 a.m, Marcus came home carrying what looked like a large duffel bag, but the way he carried it, the way it moved, it wasn't clothes or sports equipment. It was heavy, awkward, and parts of it seemed to shift independently. He struggled to get it through the front door, then dragged it down the hallway toward his room. As he passed under the hallway light, I caught a glimpse of what was sticking out of the partially unzipped bag. A human hand. Pale, motionless, with bright red nail polish. I watched in horror as he disappeared into his room with his burden. For the next 3 hours I could hear sounds through the walls. Running water, the hum of what might have been power tools, and that same chemical smell that had been plaguing our apartment for months. I didn't sleep for the next 2 days. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything except the knowledge that I was living with someone who was bringing dead bodies into our shared space. The rational part of my brain kept trying to find alternative explanations. Maybe it was a mannequin, maybe he worked at a mortuary, maybe there was some innocent explanation for what I'd seen. But deep down, I knew better. I started researching missing persons reports in our area. Over the past 6 months, 8 women between the ages of 19 and 30 had disappeared without a trace. All of them had been last seen leaving bars or clubs late at night. All of them fit a similar physical description. Petite, dark hair, The kind of women who might be easy targets for someone looking to hurt people. The most recent disappearance had been reported just 4 days ago. A 24-year-old nursing student named Jessica, who'd vanished after leaving a downtown club around midnight. Her picture was all over the local news, and when I saw it, I nearly threw up. She was wearing the same earring I'd found on our kitchen counter. That's when I knew I had to do something. But I also knew I had to be careful. If Marcus really was what I thought he was, then confronting him directly could make me his next victim. I was already living in his hunting ground. I waited until I was sure he was asleep. Then I crept out of my room with a screwdriver and picked the lock on his bedroom door. What I found inside will haunt me for the rest of my life. The room had been completely transformed. Heavy plastic sheeting covered the walls and floor. There were tables set up with tools I didn't recognize, containers filled with chemicals, and a large freezer that definitely hadn't been there when he'd moved in. But the worst part was the photographs, hundreds of them, covering one entire wall. Pictures of women, some I recognized from missing persons reports, others I didn't. But they were all taken in the same location, against the same plastic backdrop. And in every single photo, the women's eyes were closed. They weren't sleeping. I took pictures of everything with my phone, then got out of there as fast as I could. I drove straight to the police station and told them everything. Showed them the camera footage, the photos from his room, the timeline I'd been keeping of his activities. They arrested Marcus at our apartment 6 hours later. He didn't resist, didn't seem surprised. When they searched his room more thoroughly, they found remains from 11 different victims preserved in that freezer, along with detailed journals describing what he'd done to each of them. It turns out Marcus had been using our apartment as his base of operations for almost the entire time we'd lived together. He'd target women at bars and clubs, gain their trust, then bring them back to our place when he knew I'd be asleep. The night shift job was complete fiction. He'd been spending those evening hours hunting. The detective told me later that if I hadn't come forward when I did, I probably would have been next. Marcus had been getting sloppy, taking bigger risks. It was only a matter of time before he decided his roommate knew too much. I've moved back in with my parents for now. I can't even think about living with a stranger again. Maybe ever. Every time I close my eyes, I see those photographs. Those women who trusted the wrong person and paid for it with their lives. The trial starts next month. I'll have to testify, relive all of this again in front of a courtroom full of people. But if it helps put him away forever, if it gives those families some kind of closure, then it'll be worth it. I keep thinking about all those nights I slept peacefully in the next room while Marcus was doing unspeakable things just a few feet away. How many times did I walk past his door while there was someone in there fighting for their life? How many times did I make small talk with him in the kitchen while he was planning his next attack? The worst part is knowing that I was never really safe. For 8 months, I lived with a predator who could have killed me any time he wanted. The only reason I'm still alive is because I was useful to him. I helped pay the rent on his murder house, gave him a cover of normalcy that helped him blend in. I don't know how I'm supposed to trust anyone again after this. How do you share space with someone? How do you let someone into your life when you know that people like Marcus exist? People who can seem completely normal while hiding something so monstrous? I honestly don't have words for that one. The idea that someone could be living such a horrifically double life right under their roommate's nose is the stuff of nightmares. The fact that this person's intuition and bravery potentially saved not just their own life, but the lives of future victims is incredible. Sometimes the most ordinary situations hide the most extraordinary darkness. And our next story proves that point in a completely different way. This happened 2 weeks ago, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I'm 28, work in marketing, pretty normal life. My boyfriend Jake and I have been together for about 1.5 years. He's always been a little secretive about his family, said they lived across the country, that he wasn't close with them. The usual stuff that makes you not want to pry too deep. About 6 months into our relationship, Jake started getting these phone calls that he'd always take in the other room. When I asked about them, he'd just say, It was work stuff or an old friend. No big deal, everyone deserves privacy, right? But then the calls started coming at weird hours. 2 a.m, 5 a.m, always when we were together. And Jake's reaction to them was strange. He'd get this panicked look, grab his phone, and disappear, for sometimes an hour at a time. When he'd come back, he'd be exhausted, emotionally drained, but he'd never want to talk about it. The turning point came 3 weeks ago, when we were at dinner, and his phone rang. Jake looked at the screen, and his face went completely white. He declined the call, but immediately got a text that made him stand up from the table. "I have to go," he said, already reaching for his wallet. "Family emergency." I offered to come with him, to help however I could, but he shut that down fast, said it was something he had to handle alone, that he'd explain later. He kissed me goodbye and left me sitting there with 2 full plates of food and a check I had to pay myself. He didn't come home that night or the next night. For 3 days I got nothing but brief texts saying he was dealing with family stuff and that he'd be back soon. No phone calls, no real explanations, just enough contact to let me know he was alive. When he finally came home, he looked like he'd aged 5 years. His clothes were wrinkled, he had dark circles under his eyes, and he smelled like cigarettes, even though he doesn't smoke. I tried to get him to tell me what happened, but he just said his mum had been in the hospital and everything was fine now. Something about his story didn't add up. If his mum had been in the hospital, why couldn't I come? Why couldn't he take my calls? Why did he look more guilty than worried? Last week I did something I'm not proud of. Jake was in the shower and his phone was on the nightstand. I'd never gone through his phone before. I'm not that person, but I was tired of feeling like I was dating someone I didn't really know. What I found changed everything. The recent calls weren't from his family. They were from someone named Michael, and when I scrolled through their text conversation, my heart started racing. "She's asking questions again," Jake had written. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." "You have to," Michael had replied. "Emma needs you. We all need you. I hate lying to her, but what choice do I have? If she finds out the truth, she'll leave." The truth would destroy everything, you know that. And I kept scrolling, going back months in their conversation. What I pieced together was impossible to believe, but the evidence was right there in front of me. Jake wasn't just in a relationship with me. He was married, had been for 6 years. His wife's name was Emma, and she was struggling with severe mental health issues. The late-night phone calls weren't from work or friends, they were crisis calls. Emma having breakdowns, Emma threatening to hurt herself, Emma needing Jake to come home immediately to talk her through whatever episode she was having. Michael was Emma's brother, and from what I could tell from their messages, he'd been covering for Jake, helping him maintain this double life, so that Emma wouldn't have to deal with the stress of a divorce on top of everything else she was going through. "The doctors say she's getting better," Jake had texted Michael a few weeks earlier. "Maybe another 6 months, and she'll be stable enough for me to tell her about the separation." "And what about your girlfriend?" Michael had asked. "I love her," Jake replied, "but Emma comes first. She always has to come first." I felt sick reading those messages. For 1.5 years, I'd been the other woman without knowing it. Every time Jake disappeared for days at a time, he was going home to his wife. Every time he said he couldn't spend the night because of work, he was probably tucking Emma into bed. But the worst part was understanding why he'd done it. This wasn't some selfish affair where he wanted to have his cake and eat it too. This was a man who was trapped between his obligation to his mentally ill wife and his desire for a normal relationship with someone else. When Jake came out of the bathroom, I was sitting on the bed with his phone in my hands. He took one look at my face and knew exactly what had happened. "How long have you known?" I asked. He sat down on the edge of the bed, as far from me as possible. "Known what?" "About Emma, about your wife." Jake buried his face in his hands. For a long time, neither of us said anything. "We separated 2 years ago," he finally said. "Not legally, but we weren't living together anymore. I moved into an apartment across town, and we were going to file for divorce. But then Emma had a complete breakdown. Hospitalized for 3 weeks. When she got out, her therapist said that any major life changes could trigger another episode, maybe worse than the first one. I wanted to be angry, but looking at Jake, I could see how much this had been eating at him. He looked broken. So you've been living a double life for 2 years? I never meant for it to go this long. Emma was supposed to get better. We were supposed to figure out a way to end things that wouldn't destroy her. But every time she makes progress, something happens and she backslides. And I'm just what? A placeholder until your wife is mentally healthy enough to handle a divorce? Jake looked up at me then, and I could see tears in his eyes. You're not a placeholder. I love you. But Emma, if I leave her now, if she finds out about you, her brother thinks she might try to kill herself. The weight of that statement settled between us. Jake wasn't just cheating on his wife. He was trying to keep her alive. And I wasn't just the other woman. I was part of a situation that could literally be life or death for someone I'd never met. What am I supposed to do with this? I asked. How am I supposed to be in a relationship with someone who's married? I don't know, Jake said. I've been asking myself the same question for months. We talked until dawn. Jake told me everything. About Emma's bipolar disorder, about the suicide attempts, about how guilty he felt for wanting a life outside of being her caretaker. He showed me pictures of her, and I could see why he felt so protective. She looked fragile, like a strong wind might blow her away. He also told me about the toll it was taking on him, the constant anxiety, the sleepless nights, the way he felt like he was betraying everyone. Emma by wanting to leave, me by staying married, himself by living a lie. I want to choose you, he said, but I can't live with Emma's blood on my hands. I understood, but understanding didn't make it hurt any less. I was in love with a man who belonged to someone else, and that someone else needed him more than I did. I gave Jake an ultimatum, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I couldn't keep living in limbo. He had 6 months to figure out a plan. Therapy for Emma, a gradual transition, whatever it took, but I couldn't be someone's secret forever. It's been 2 weeks since that conversation. Jake has started seeing a therapist who specializes in these kinds of situations. Emma's doctor has agreed to work with us on a long-term plan for Jake to slowly separate from her life without triggering a crisis. I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if I'm being incredibly understanding or incredibly stupid, but I love Jake, and I believe that he's trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation. The hardest part is that there's no villain here. Emma didn't choose to be mentally ill. Jake didn't choose to fall in love with someone else while his wife was sick. And I didn't choose to fall in love with a married man. Sometimes life just puts you in situations where every choice feels wrong, and you have to figure out which wrong choice you can live with. That story is a perfect example of how real life is so much more complicated than we want it to be. There's no clean ending, no obvious right or wrong, just people trying to navigate an impossible situation where someone's going to get hurt no matter what happens. Our final story takes us in a completely different direction, but it's equally messy in its own way. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones hiding the biggest secrets. I'm 35 years old, and I thought I had my life figured out. Good job, nice house, solid marriage to my wife of 8 years, Lisa. We've been trying to have kids for the past 3 years with no luck, which has been hard on both of us, but we've been supporting each other through it. Lisa works as a nurse at the local hospital, and she's always been dedicated to her job. Long shifts, weekend work, always putting her patients first. I've always admired that about her, even when it meant she'd come home exhausted and we'd barely get to spend time together. About 4 months ago, Lisa started picking up even more shifts. She'd leave for work at 6 a.m. and sometimes not come home until after midnight. When I asked her about it, she said the hospital was short-staffed and they were offering overtime pay that we could use for the fertility treatments. It made sense. Those treatments are expensive, and we'd already burned through most of our savings. If Lisa wanted to work extra hours to help us afford another round of IVF, I wasn't going to complain. But then I started noticing things that didn't add up. Lisa would come home from these supposedly exhausting double shifts, looking refreshed, happy even. She'd have more energy than she'd had in months. and she started paying more attention to her appearance. New clothes, new perfume, spending more time on her hair and makeup, even on days when she was just going to work. The first real red flag came when I decided to surprise her at work with dinner. I knew she'd been pulling another double shift, so I figured I'd bring her favourite Thai food, and we could eat together during her break. When I got to the hospital, I asked for Lisa at the nurse's station. The woman behind the desk looked confused. Lisa Mitchell. She's not scheduled today. Actually, I think she's been on vacation this week. My stomach dropped. Vacation? Yeah, she requested the whole week off about a month ago. Said she and her husband were going out of town. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I'd just heard. Lisa had left for work that morning, like she did every day. She was supposed to be working a double shift, but according to her co-workers, she wasn't even scheduled. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through all the possible explanations. Maybe there had been a miscommunication. Maybe she'd been called to work at a different location. Maybe she'd picked up shifts at another hospital. But deep down, I knew none of those explanations were true. When Lisa came home that night at her usual late hour, I was waiting for her in the living room. "How was work?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Exhausting," she said, dropping her purse by the door. "We were slammed all day. I barely had time for a break." "That's weird," I said, "because I stopped by the hospital around dinner time to bring you food, and they said you weren't scheduled today." Lisa froze. For just a second, I saw panic flash across her face before she recovered. "Oh, that," she said, with a laugh that sounded forced. "I got called in to cover at the downtown location. They probably didn't update the system." It was a reasonable explanation, but something about the way she delivered it felt rehearsed, like she'd been preparing for this conversation. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to Lisa's routine. She'd leave for work every morning with her nurse's bag and scrubs, but when she came home, the bag looked exactly the same. No stethoscope around her neck, no hospital ID badge visible, none of the usual signs of someone who'd just worked a 12-hour shift in a medical facility. I also noticed that she'd started keeping her phone with her at all times. Even when she was in the shower, her phone would be sitting on the bathroom counter. She'd never done that before. Last week, I made a decision that felt like a violation of everything I believed about marriage and trust, but I had to know what was going on. I called in sick to work and followed Lisa when she left for her supposed shift. I stayed far enough back that she wouldn't notice me, but close enough to see where she was going. She didn't drive toward either of the hospitals in our area. Instead, she headed to an upscale part of town I'd never seen her visit before. She pulled into the parking lot of a luxury apartment complex and used a key card to get through the security gate. I parked across the street and waited. About 20 minutes later, I saw Lisa walk out of the building with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, well-dressed, probably in his early 40s. They were holding hands. They got into his car, a BMW that probably cost more than I make in a year, and drove to a restaurant downtown. Through the window, I could see them sitting across from each other, laughing, sharing food off each other's plates like they'd been together for years. I sat in my car watching my wife on a date with another man, and I felt like my entire world was collapsing. They spent 3 hours at that restaurant. Afterward, they went back to his apartment building, and Lisa didn't come out until almost 11 p.m. She drove home, changed into scrubs in our garage, and came inside complaining about how exhausting her shift had been. I wanted to confront her right then, but I was too shocked to form words. Instead, I pretended to be asleep and spent the night staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how long this had been going on. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. What he found out was worse than I'd imagined. Lisa had been having an affair for 8 months. The man's name was Dr. Richard Hawthorne, and he was a cardiologist at a private practice across town. He was also married with 2 teenage kids. But here's the part that really destroyed me. Lisa wasn't just cheating on me. She'd been living an entirely fabricated life with this man. According to the investigator, She told Dr. Hawthorne that she was divorced, that her ex-husband had been abusive, and that she was struggling to make ends meet as a single mother. Single mother. Lisa had told this man that we had a child together, a 7-year-old daughter named Sophie, who lived with her full-time. She'd even shown him fake pictures, apparently taken from her sister's social media, of her with her actual niece. Dr. Hawthorne had been supporting Lisa financially for months, thinking he was helping a struggling single mum. The overtime pay she'd been bringing home wasn't from extra shifts at the hospital. It was money from her boyfriend, who thought he was helping her pay for childcare and rent. Lisa had created an entire fake life to justify her affair, complete with a tragic backstory and a fictional child. The level of deception was breathtaking. When I confronted Lisa with everything I'd learned, she didn't deny it. She just sat at our kitchen table and cried. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. "It started as just a friendship. Richard was going through problems with his wife, and I was feeling lonely because of all the fertility stuff. We'd just talk, you know? But then it became more. And the fake daughter, the story about being divorced?" Lisa looked up at me, with tears streaming down her face. I panicked. When he started asking about my personal life, I didn't know what to say. I couldn't tell him I was married, so I made up a story. And then I had to keep making up more stories to cover the first lie. "For 8 months, Lisa. You've been lying to everyone for 8 months. I know how awful this is. I wanted to tell you. I wanted to end it, but I didn't know how. Richard thinks he's in love with me. He's been talking about leaving his wife, about helping me get custody of Sophie. The absurdity of it was staggering. Lisa had created such an elaborate fiction that her boyfriend was ready to blow up his own family for a woman and child who didn't exist. What happens now, I asked, when Richard finds out that Sophie isn't real? That you're married? That everything you've told him is a lie? Lisa shook her head. I don't know. I never thought about that part. That's when I realised that Lisa hadn't just betrayed me. She'd created a situation that was going to destroy multiple families. Dr. Hawthorne's wife and kids were going to find out about his affair. He was going to discover that the woman he thought he loved had been manipulating him for months. And I was going to have to figure out how to rebuild my life after learning that my wife was capable of deception on a scale I couldn't have imagined. Lisa moved out last week. She's staying with her sister while we figure out what comes next. She says she wants to work on our marriage, that she'll do whatever it takes to rebuild my trust. But how do you come back from something like this? The woman I thought I married would never have been capable of creating such an elaborate web of lies. Either I never really knew Lisa at all, or she's become someone completely different over the course of our marriage. I don't know which possibility is worse. Dr. Hawthorne called me yesterday. Lisa had finally told him the truth, and he wanted to apologise for unknowingly participating in the destruction of my marriage. He sounded as shocked as I felt when I first learned about the affair. I thought I was helping a struggling single mother, he told me. I had no idea she was married. I had no idea Sophie wasn't real. We talked for almost an hour, 2 men trying to figure out how we'd both been so thoroughly deceived by the same person. In a weird way, it was comforting to know that I wasn't the only one who'd been completely blindsided by Lisa's capacity for deception. Now I'm left trying to figure out what's real and what isn't. Were there other lies I never discovered? How much of our 8-year marriage was built on fiction? Can someone who's capable of maintaining such an elaborate deception for so long ever really be trusted again? I don't have answers to any of those questions. All I know is that the life I thought I had was apparently just another one of Lisa's stories, and now I have to figure out how to write a new one. That story perfectly captures how someone you think you know completely can turn out to be living an entirely different reality. The sheer complexity of maintaining that level of deception for so long is mind-boggling, and the collateral damage it creates just keeps spreading. These stories remind us that behind every ordinary facade, there might be something extraordinary happening, whether it's heartbreaking, terrifying, or just completely surreal. The internet gives us this incredible window into lives we'd never otherwise glimpse, and honestly, I'm grateful for that. Even when the stories are difficult to hear, they remind us that human experience is so much more complex and unpredictable than we usually imagine. If you made it this far through today's stories, you're clearly someone who appreciates the wild complexity of real human drama.